remember this day very well. I was working at Combustion Engineering on Bay Hill Road at the time, and I had left work a little early that day to go to the Combustion Engineering Credit Union to get the check to close on our very first house that my future husband and I were purchasing in Agawam, Mass. I arrived at the credit union and the sun was shining and I was so excited. While I waited for the check to be typed up and paperwork, the clouds came flying in, and before I knew it, it was pouring rain and extremely windy. I was thinking to myself, geez, wish I had an umbrella in my hand. I left the credit union with our life savings in hand and tried to get into my car. Thank goodness I didn't have that umbrella. I think it might have lifted me off the ground. I got into my car eventually, but was fighting against the wind to close the door. The rain was pouring in as I pulled and pulled on the door. Success, it finally closed. But my car, my seat, and everything, including myself, was soaked. My normal route to Agawam from Windsor would have been to take Route 75 past the airport. But the storm was so strong and violent, I thought maybe I should pull over and wait for it to pass. The radio station out of Hartford reported it was a bad thunderstorm. Back then, there was no cell phone, so I couldn't call my future husband and say, look, I'm caught in the storm. I'm going to be late. So I had to move on. I couldn't stop. So I kept going and decided to turn off Route 75, taking River Street to get to 91 instead. And this was all happening around 3 p.m. I met my fiancé as planned in Agawam, and we both talked about the storm, and he said he saw the sky looking very weird and clouds shooting across the sky. We arrived at the lawyer's office in Holyoke to sign the closing papers. There I am, soaking wet from the storm. We signed the papers, and his secretary enters the office to announce there was a tornado that touched down in Agawam. We all looked at each other and said, hope our house is still standing. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, my future sister-in-law was home alone in Feeding Hills and called her dad at work to tell him the trees were falling. He told her to get in the basement, and then the phone went dead. My father-in-law promptly left work in Holyoke and tried to get to Feeding Hills. Roads were closed as trees were down everywhere, so it was a tough commute. At the same time, my future mother-in-law was on her way home from work as well, but had to stop and pick up her mother of the groom dress at the cleaners as we were getting married 3 days later. One of my bridesmaids had volunteered to make the bridesmaids' dresses for me. She lived across the street from the airport and had no electricity. The dresses, of course, were not done yet, and the wedding was fast approaching. Lucky for me, a neighbor a few houses down from my friend had a generator. The neighbors all collected their extension cords and ran them from the generator to the sewing machine so the dresses could be completed in time for the wedding 3 days later. My in-laws ended up with a tree laying down in the driveway, but no damage to their house. The church where our wedding was going to be held and our newly purchased house were all spared damage. I say we all had a guardian angel or two watching over us that day.
What were your thoughts? Were you scared? Were you annoyed?
Well, I was like, holy cow, I can't get this car door closed. How am I going to continue on with this check to go buy our house? And how am I going to let my fiancé know I'm stuck in Windsor? So I just kept pulling, and the wind was blowing from, like, the back end of my car and fighting against it. And finally, maybe, as, you know, that guardian angel came along and gently subsided the wind for a second. So finally, on one of those pulls, I got the door closed, but I was drenched. My car was drenched. I think there was like a little puddle of water at my feet. I'm like, oh my God. And I remember thinking, how am I going to go to a lawyer's office? I am like dripping wet.
That's funny.
I'm going to go sit in his nice leather chair and go, shh.
When you were driving, do you have any memories of anything while you were driving? Were limbs fly? You know, what was the scene when you were trying to drive?
Well, I was leaving the Combustion Federal Credit Union, and I had the radio station, you know, turned to a local radio station, and trying to listen to see what is happening here. Am I, you know, stuck in a bad storm? Is it going to pass? What is this? I don't remember whether there was a lot of thunder and lightning, but I do remember them saying the, you know, Hartford, Connecticut County is experiencing a bad thunderstorm. And I thought to myself, I don't see or hear any thunder, but, you know, maybe it was raining so hard, I just could barely see where I was going. And so I was going through the back roads and ended up at the intersection there of, I forget what street it is, but it's 75 and the little fire station across from that little plaza there on Route 75 just before the Farmington River.
Yeah.
And so I turned left onto 75, and that's when the radio station said, we're experiencing this bad thunderstorm. And I thought to myself, should I be on a side street or should I be on more of a major highway in case it's really bad? And then I thought, well, I probably should be on the highway, in case there's something really bad going on, more traffic around me, people to help, whatever. So I turned on River Street to follow Farmington River to get to 91 at that point. And it was just raining so very hard. I just couldn't even see. I was kind of driving, but kind of crawling because I couldn't see anything in front of me. I don't remember if I saw any limbs going down, but it was just raining so hard. I was like concentrating on making sure I didn't go off the road and go into the river.
Right.
Yeah, I didn't really know at that point that I was at the beginning of it. Like I said, we all looked at each other and go, holy cow, do we still have a house? Do we have tornado insurance? What happened? And my husband had to go back to work because he was a, UPS driver at the time. So he had just, kind of parked his truck in Agawam. We got to Holyoke, and I brought him back to his truck. And he went back to work, and I went back to where I was living at my parents' house in Enfield at the time. And I remember he called me a little while later, and he said that there was the tornado went right through where you were, and it touched down in Agawam and Feeding Hills. He said, I can't reach my parents' house. So, the phone's dead or nobody's answering. And so he left work when he got out of work, and he came to Enfield, and we drove from Enfield to Feeding Hills, but we went through Suffield, and it was the scariest thing I've ever seen in my life. A trip that normally would have taken us probably, I would say half hour to go, took us an hour and a half to get there, and we were just like on pins and needles. What are we going to find when we finally get to Feeding Hills? And we got there, and as luck would have it, there was my mother-in-law and father-in-law each have their own car, but neither one of them was home, and the tree literally just laid right down their driveway. Skipped the house. I think one little pine tree in the backyard got uprooted a little bit, but the house was not damaged. They were fine. Nobody was hurt, so we breathed a sigh of relief. But my poor mother-in-law, who's Italian, was like freaking out. She's like, oh my God, you're getting married in 3 days. I'm having people over after the wedding. I don't have any electricity.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it was like, oh.
But your future sister-in-law was home.
Yes, she was
at the time. So what was that experience like for her? Not that you're speaking for her, but just
right.
Like what I'm sure in conversation she told you what was going on.
Yeah, she was 13 at the time. So she said, she was home, and she could see, she was looking out, and again, same thing we were experiencing, a super bad storm, lots of rain, could hardly see out the window, and then she could see that the trees were falling. So she called her dad at work and said, Dad, the trees are falling. And he said, get in the basement. And as soon as he said that to her, the phone went dead. So she was like panicking and was afraid to go down to the stairs and be there by herself, but she knew she couldn't go outside and, go to a neighbor's house. So she just went down there and I think she just probably paced around and cried and waited for somebody to show up, which took her father quite some time to get home again, because he ran into the same thing we did. Trees down all over the place, and, roads were impassable. You had to turn around and find another road. Right, and, again, no cell phone, so you can't call and say, I'm on my way, I'm stuck here, Because we had planned to, we were getting married in Feeding Hills at the Sacred Heart Church on Springfield Street. And, luckily the church was spared. Our reception was going to be kind of around the corner from there at a club of some sort. I forget what it was called back then, on Garden Street here in town, so not too far. But in between, we had decided we wanted to go to Stanley Park and have our pictures taken. We were hoping for, the fall foliage and, colorful pictures and all that, but we were kind of a week too early for that. But so we kind of stayed with that plan, and we left the church and we drove through North Westfield Street, through parts of Robinson State Park to get to Stanley Park, and the trees just down everywhere, and the trees with no leaves on them that looked like they were matchsticks. It was just like, oh my God, this is incredible! I can't believe this. And I remember hearing stories of a bank that was on Route 75 near the Route 20 intersection, and that some of the money was found in upstate New York, like Albany area, that it had carried it that far. I remember, too, I have an older cousin, and I think he was a truck driver for Suburban Propane at the time. He said that he came along the Route 20 connector after the tornado had passed, and he was, helping people get out of their cars, and that, cars had been overturned on Route 20, and he was like, what the heck happened here? I remember hearing stories that the Air Museum was totally devastated because all the airplanes got picked up and tossed over. I remember hearing stories of people, like in the Pequannock area, that, the houses were demolished, and supposedly one lady was, her husband worked at combustion. She was downstairs in her basement ironing, and the wind came along and just somehow whipped apart the house, supposedly ripped off her clothes. I don't know how true any of this is, and left her unscathed, which I was like, what? I mean, I don't have any experience with tornadoes, but how is that possible? I don't, like a lot of people say that when there's a tornado, you can hear like a freight train. I don't remember hearing that when I was in my car. I just remember that it was just blowing and raining so hard that I had no idea if I was on the road or not. I was just like crawling and praying, oh my God, please get me to the highway. Please get me to the highway. I mean, I know my husband said when he was in the Feeding Hills area, because Adwan Feeding Hills area, that's where he was delivering that day. He came out of one of the, I think he was by a school, and he looked up and he said the sky just had this eerie, different color to it. And he said, and the clouds were like arrows. They were just like shooting in one direction. He's like, what is going on? I don't think it was raining that hard for him at the time, because he was looking up at the clouds shooting. But he was, he thought something is going on somewhere. But he just didn't, know where or to what extent. And like I said, I turned on the radio and I was like, come on, somebody tell me what is going on. And, they said, bad thunderstorm. I'm like, this is not a freaking bad thunderstorm, is it? If they had said a tornado was in the area, I think I would have completely freaked out, and I don't know what I would have done. But so maybe that was kind of a blessing in disguise for me. I said, oh well, it's a bad thunderstorm. I can handle that. It's funny. I mean, it is 40 years ago, but I remember it like it happened yesterday. It was just it was such an event. Maybe because everything else that was going on at that time for me, with the buying the house and getting married and all that. But it was like, I mean, I can close my eyes and just picture that entire day like it happened 10 minutes ago.